Good morning, Facebook community. Welcome back to UCI Mind's monthly Facebook Live series, Ask the Doc, Alzheimer's Research Today. Thanks for joining us today. I am Chelsea Cox. I'm the Associate Director of Education for UCI Mind, which is one of 32 congressionally designated Alzheimer's disease research centers across the nation, and it's the only center right here in Orange County. This series is your opportunity to learn about the advances that are happening in Alzheimer's research and to ask our experts your questions. And today, I'm very excited to be joined by former UCI Mind Director, Dr. Andrea Tenner. Welcome, Dr. Tenner.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, giving me this opportunity to talk with the UCI Mind followers.
Yeah, very excited to have you, Dr. Tenner. And just to briefly introduce Dr. Tenner, she received her PhD from UC San Diego, and she's an esteemed professor in the UCI School of Medicine and the UCI School of Biological Sciences. Throughout her career, she has received numerous academic awards, and she has published over 100 scientific journal articles. Dr. Tenner's research examines the role of inflammation and how our body's immune system responds to Alzheimer's disease, which will be the topic of our discussion today. And moreover, using this knowledge, she and her team in her lab are actually testing promising possible new treatments for Alzheimer's disease in mouse models. So I really look forward to hearing more about your work today. Dr. Tenner, again, thanks for joining me. And to get started, before we talk about Alzheimer's disease in the context of immune disorders, I first just want to start with, what exactly is an immune disorder or an autoimmune disease, and what are some examples?
Okay, great. One of my favorite topics. So first, let's just talk about what the immune system is. Everyone is probably aware that there are white cells that flow through the blood, and those are your immune cells, but they're also everywhere in the body. And there are also a whole series of molecules that are both in the blood and then in all the other tissues that are in constant surveillance, watching for invaders or pathogens so that they're ready to help to protect the individual. So first, the immune system has to recognize that something is entering, that's an invader, it's foreign, and it's dangerous. Then they have to the system orchestrates a response that will eliminate that particular pathogen or dangerous thing so that you don't get sick and die. And thirdly, the immune system has to control itself and downregulate that response so that the system can get back to normal functioning where they're just watching and not generating a response. So disorders of the immune system then are things where the immune system just is not working. And that would be very rare immunodeficiency diseases, which are genetically caused. That doesn't, those are again rare because people without an immune system don't live very long. But there are also other immune disorders that you mentioned that are autoimmune disorders. And that's when the immune system makes a mistake and recognizes your own tissues as being foreign and then drives an immune response against those tissues, therefore destroying those tissues and the function of that particular organ in the local environment. The third case of an immune system disorder is that of excessive inflammation. And sometimes these are called autoinflammatory disorders. And these disorders are a case in which there would be an instance where the immune system is sensing something and starts the response, but doesn't stop the response. And sometimes that occurs because the thing that the immune system is recognizing as foreign is not eliminated, does not go away. And so it's always there, constantly stimulating the immune system. And so in that case, those would be things like inflammatory bowel disease and rheumatoid arthritis that many people have heard. So the initial cause of the inflammation can be different, but it's the excessive inflammation that doesn't turn off that then damages the particular tissue or organ, and we'll get to that when we talk about the brain and Alzheimer's disease.
Well, I have a lot of questions about how inflammation and the immune system relates to Alzheimer's disease, and I'm sure that our audience and our viewers do too. So viewers, as you can think of questions, you can go ahead and jot them down there in the comments box. And please do remember that whatever you write is going to be linked to your name and visible to others who are watching. So Dr. Tenner, then how exactly is inflammation related to Alzheimer's disease, and what causes the inflammation?
Okay, great. So many people would know that in Alzheimer's disease, there is an accumulation of misfolded proteins, which is called beta amyloid, amyloid beta, but they form these characteristics amyloid plaques that are found in Alzheimer's disease brain. And these particular accumulations then have features that the immune system recognizes as looking like they're foreign, that they're bad, because it's misfolded. It doesn't normally happen in the normal body. And so, as it turns out, when they misfold, they begin to look like something dangerous, a pathogen. And so the immune system then begins to be activated, recruits in cells in the brain that are immune cells that are called microglia. They are then come to the area of the plaque. They get further stimulated and begin to produce inflammatory molecules because they're very well intentioned, thinking they want to get rid of something that is bad, even though these plaques may not be very harmful in the brain by themselves. It's the response that is really problematic. So since these plaques are very resistant to degradation, they don't go away. And so this inflammation is constantly being generated by the immune system that constantly thinks there's something foreign. So that causes inflammatory molecules, which are toxic to neurons, and then disrupts the neuronal circuits that are needed for memory and learning and cognitive function. And you therefore get this dysfunction of the brain due to these inflammatory molecules that are generating toxicity towards the neurons. Now, there's also a tau protein, and it's an indicator of dead and dying neurons, and it also stimulates the immune system. So you have an initial inflammation killing neurons, which then further stimulates the immune system to further generate inflammation, and you get the snowballing effect of inflammation in Alzheimer's. Slow, occurring over years, but ultimately winning out and disrupting the nerve connections that are needed for cognition. Now, just to be clear, there are other things that also contribute to neuronal dysfunction in Alzheimer's disease, but there's always a local inflammation whenever there's a loss of cognition. So the contribution of inflammation to the loss of cognition, which is the big deal in Alzheimer's disease, really remains to be seen. When we have drugs that can target and suppress this inflammation, we'll be able to see how much does that really contribute. But because it's there all the time, and because we know it can damage the cells and the neurons, we think that we might be able to slow this progression of Alzheimer's disease if we can slow down this inflammation.
Okay. So then, do you consider Alzheimer's disease an immune disorder?
Well, that's a great question because these plaques look foreign. The immune system is trying to do its job and is trying to get rid of those, but since you can't get rid of them, you have this excessive inflammation. So Alzheimer's disease could be considered an inflammatory disorder because you have unnecessary inflammation, because the immune system is constantly being tricked by these misfolded proteins.
Okay. So if it is an immune disorder, then how should it be treated?
Okay, so there are many places of intervention for tackling this problem of inflammation. And I've mentioned before that one of those areas would be the complement system, which is this series of proteins that helps to recognize dangerous things that gets triggered by the amyloid beta plaques. But those then activation fragments interact with microglia, make the microglia produce inflammatory responses, and then the microglia also can activate the astrocytes, which actually now begin to make not only more inflammatory molecules, but also more complement proteins, which means you're getting more complement, which you can then get more activation, and you get this snowballing effect.
And just really quickly, astrocytes. You did talk about microglia a little bit, so that's the immune cells of the brain.
Right.
Astrocytes.
Astrocytes are normally helping the neurons to make good connection, but good connections between neurons and send the signals forward. But they also can help in certain immune functions, and we are really further exploring the astrocytes for that. They also can help to clear out cellular debris or dying cells, which happens every day. And we need to have a way of clearing them, recycling the different components of the cells or eliminating those that are not useful anymore. So astrocytes are very helpful in cognition and maintaining good cognition, good signaling between neurons, but can also help in some immune functions. And this making of this complement protein that they're helping, they might be trying to help clear things away, but they're also feeding into this increased role of inflammation. So,
so how should it? We actually have a good question here.
Okay.
How can are there any tests for inflammation? Is there any way that we can check?
Yes. Well, that's a really great question. And we are working on, it gets to the idea of biomarkers. And so we're constantly looking for biomarkers that are readily accessible in the blood would be the best because it's less invasive. And in the spinal fluid, of course, we have some, but there's lots of different situations where you can get some inflammatory molecules showing up, and oftentimes they're at very, very low levels. And so it's hard to detect exactly what it's doing. And I should add that inflammation in the appropriate amount is very good. And so sometimes you would be looking at an inflammatory marker and thinking, oh, this is bad, when actually it's part of the good response of trying to protect you against inflammation, against pathogens. So that's why it's very important when we're trying to target things like the complement system, microglia, and astrocytes to really make sure that we're not going to eliminate all the protective effects of the immune response, because you don't want to be immunocompromised at age 40 or 50 when you begin to start taking some of these drugs to lower the inflammation.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's kind of trying to find a healthy balance of everything.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yes.
We have a couple more questions here. One of the questions is, have you found a connection between Alzheimer's disease and any other immune disorder, specifically SLE? And I'm not sure what that stands
Oh, that's
for.
okay. SLE is systemic lupus erythematosus. Okay. And it is an autoimmune disorder. And it is a situation where the immune system recognizes your own cells and begins to destroy them. You get vasculitis. You can also get some dementia from SLE. You don't always have these psychoactive lupus, but in some cases, individuals do have that. So there is not a connection necessarily between Alzheimer's disease and lupus, because they're really two different diseases, but you can end up with the same kind of effects of if it gets into the brain, lupus gets into the brain, then you could get loss of cognition or other behavioral problems. what is the connection between the two is this inflammation that is generated, which then is destructive to tissue, either vascular, your blood vessels sometimes, your kidneys in lupus. In Alzheimer's disease, it's really focused in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking to control inflammation, and complement, by the way, is a component that is problematic in lupus as well, SLA. And when we're looking to control inflammation, some of the things we might learn in Alzheimer's disease, we are certainly hopeful that we'll be able to use those for other neurodegenerative diseases and other neurological diseases as well. So there are some connections at the downstream end that we hopefully will be able to target. Again, we want to be really careful about where you go in. So would you like me to?
Yeah, so if you just joined us, I see a few more people have joined us. Just a reminder that as questions come up, and we've gotten a few, which is great, you can go ahead and type them there in the comments box, and to remember that whatever you write down will be linked to your name and visible to others. I do want to go back to the question of, since Alzheimer's sounds like it is an immune disorder, it definitely has inflammation involved. The best ways to treat it. And there is a question here along those lines about whether taking a daily aspirin can help, like ibuprofen, for instance, an anti-inflammatory drug could help prevent Alzheimer's.
Right. Okay, so I'll answer that question with a response that the clinical trials that have looked at non-inflammatory or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories have been problematic because in some cases they were good and beneficial, and in other cases they were actually detrimental, and in other cases there was no change. And a lot of that stems from the fact that they were treating lots of different people with these, and it may very well be that you need an anti-inflammatory at certain stages of the disease, but not at others, because again, inflammation can be good. The other thing about these broad anti-inflammatories, which I'm not saying that they're bad, but I'm saying they're not as specific because they do suppress lots of different pathways and can have side effects. So that's why in our lab, we're really looking at a very specific target, which is in this complement pathway. And it is the fragment that is generated when complement is activated by the amyloid plaques. And that fragment binds to the microglia, bringing them into the plaques and also triggering the inflammatory responses, which then trigger the astrocyte responses and then neurotoxicity to the neurons. And so what we've done is we've used both in mouse models, we have used both a genetic approach as well as a drug antagonist to treat Alzheimer's disease mouse models. And what we have found in both cases is that inhibiting this function of this fragment interacting with the microglia has actually prevented the behavioral losses or the cognitive loss that we see in these mouse models, and also substantially reduced notable pathologies in these mouse models. Now, these are models, and this is mice, and so there are some caveats to that. But what we're doing now is using newer technologies to further explore the mechanisms by which this antagonist is being used, and also to find out if there's any side effects. So the good news is that this antagonist treatment would leave intact all the other protective effects of the immune system. You could still kill bacteria. The microglia could still clear out damaged cells and keep things functioning well. But you would really just be targeting this excessive inflammation, which generates neurotoxicity, if our theories and our findings in mice translate over to humans. So we're doing a few more experiments to try and move that forward, and we're hoping that we'll get some answers in not too long, a couple of years, unfortunately. But good news is that some of these antagonists, 2 of them actually, have been used in human studies, not for Alzheimer's disease, but for other inflammatory diseases, and they've been shown to be non-toxic. So that's a good start. They've been used for not 20 years, but for a few years.
In humans, you said.
In humans, in phase 1 and phase 2 trials, and they have passed those 2. And so there's, one of them is still in phase 3 trials now for other inflammatory disorders of the periphery. The important part for Alzheimer's disease.
The periphery meaning the body.
Yes, the periphery meaning the non-brain.
Okay.
And so the important part then is going to be to see if these antagonists can cross the human blood-brain barrier to get to the site of inflammation in concentrations that are high enough to make an effect. We know this happens in mice, but mice and human aren't always the same. So we have to be real careful about being too excited about this right now and wait for the data to come in.
You mentioned the blood-brain barrier. What is that exactly?
Okay, so we have in the body, we have our blood vessels. Everybody knows about that, and the blood goes through them, and they're separated from the rest of the tissues. Otherwise, it wouldn't work so well. Blood would be everywhere. But in the brain is pretty delicate, and what the vessels going into the brain and the barrier for the brain is stronger to try to prevent toxins and pathogens from getting into the brain. So it's a lot more secure. It's got an extra barrier there. And so that means that it's more difficult for even some small molecules, or for example, antibodies, which are used for many immunotherapies. It's very difficult to get those into the brain. I mean, some do, but you have to use very high concentrations. So if you have a small molecule, you have a better chance of getting across the blood-brain barrier, but it depends on the features of that small molecule. Many companies now are working, and academic labs are working at devising new methods for getting things into the brain that would be therapeutically good.
Okay. Now, going back to these questions about prevention, somebody asked about whether aspirin can help, and then a similar question, are there certain foods that can help combat inflammation? Okay,
great. Yes, well, let me just step back a little bit on that, and just to explain that there is substantial evidence that inflammation in the rest of the body can also synergistically or additively influence the brain and influence the inflammation that is causing the dementia in Alzheimer's disease. And so one of the things that these studies have shown is that things like gum disease or gum inflammation or atherosclerosis, which generates inflammation, some inflammation in the veins, or even obesity, which generates an inflammatory set of molecules in adipose tissue, which then can travel to the brain. Those are risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. Now, all of the mechanisms aren't known, but what it means is that if we could lower the inflammation in the rest of the body, you would lower that inflammation and speed of decay in the brain. So we also know that it would be good to get a drug, but until we get a drug, good eating, healthy eating is really important. What's good for your heart is good for your brain. And so that means things like blueberries, raspberries, they all have these some neuroprotective molecules in them. Different people, we're all genetically different, and so different people are going to metabolize those things differently. But it certainly won't hurt to use those kinds of food products to help keep inflammation down, and certainly to really limit that Western diet, which causes obesity and atherosclerosis, because that would help to decrease that contribution of inflammation. So again, different people are genetically different, and therefore what works in one person won't work in the other, but we do know from genetic studies that about 50% of the genetic variants or the genetic differences that are associated with Alzheimer's disease are related to microglia and inflammation. So, what we know now says we should be trying to prevent inflammation everywhere.
So it sounds like it's definitely a combination of lifestyle and maybe some genetic risk factors.
Correct.
That can contribute to inflammation.
Yes,
and that's all.
Very much like heart disease, where you can take statins, but you should also, and other drugs, but you also want to combine that with healthy eating, exercise, and that's what we can be doing right now as we're waiting for a drug to come online for Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, and you mentioned exercise. There's been a lot of research about the promising, the benefits of exercise and reducing risk for Alzheimer's. Is that because of its benefits on our immune system and inflammation, or?
Those interactions people are working on are looking at that now, but it certainly does. It's shown that it benefits the overall picture of health in the body. And so the actual level of inflammation or the level of clearance when you're activating your cells to clear out debris, that's a good thing.
Okay. Well, Dr. Tenner, this was incredibly informative. Thank you so much. You clearly have a strong passion for the work that you do. My last question, I'm just curious, how did you get involved in Alzheimer's research?
Yeah.
What motivates you on the day-to-day? And, what are you most hopeful for in the field?
Well, I'm most hopeful for a drug to come up soon. And I'm excited about the work, but we can't wait to be done. We want to move on this. But what interested me, I was an immunologist, biochemist early on, and when coming to UCI many years ago, so strong in neuroscience that I actually got brought into Alzheimer's disease by the researchers that are here, Dr. Carl Kottman being one of them. And it's been really exciting ever since. And we're really combining these two fields, which are doing similar things. They're detecting different things or sensing different things. And we're trying to see how we can work with both of those to make sure that both of them are working efficiently and best for all individuals.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you. I think that you really helped take a very complex topic and break it down for us, for the lay community. And viewers, thank you very much for attending today. I just have a few things that I want to mention. One is that if you want to learn more about the exciting research that Dr. Tenner and her lab are doing, or to learn more about UCI Mind in general, you can visit our website at www.mind.uci.edu. Another great website to visit is the UCI Consent to Contact, or C2C registry. Researchers here at UCI Mind are always looking to partner with the community and people who are interested in helping us learn more about treatments and participating in study to test some of these treatments that are promising in the labs and translated into clinical trials for people. And other research studies that don't necessarily involve treatment. So if you just want to learn more about studies happening at UCI and whether you might be eligible, you can visit www.c2c, that's the number 2, c2c.uci.edu. And you can sign up there to learn about studies. And then much like this Facebook Live series, Ask the Doc, we have actually an in-person community Ask the Doc quarterly throughout Orange County. And I know Dr. Tenner has participated on panels in the past. Our next one is going to be happening on June 13th at the Bowers Museum in Santa Ana. So if you'd like to learn more about that program, you can visit our website as well. And then lastly, I just want to thank you again, Dr. Tenner, and also remind you to tune in next month. I will be joined by Dr. Elizabeth Head on the first Friday of the month, which is May 3rd at 9:00 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, just like today. And with Dr. Head, I will be discussing if there's any promising vaccines for Alzheimer's disease. So we hope to see you then. And again, thanks very much.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the followers.
Take care.